This video I'm going to show you how to do a fuel volume test, and we're going to be using the little Ford Ranger that we've got here in the shop, and I'll walk you through how to check for fuel volume. The purpose of this test is to not only see if the fuel pump is generating enough pressure, but also if it's supplying enough fuel to the engine. So it has to be able to supply enough gallons per minute in order to satisfy the fuel needs of the engine. The tool that we're going to be using is this tool here. It's made by Mighty Vac, and so I'll kind of go through the setup of this tool. So you've got a returnless system, you've got a return system, and this sets up to do both. And so we'll go ahead and we'll set this all up, and then I'll come back and walk you through the process. Okay, inside the toolkit we've got our volume gauge right here, and with the volume gauge you've got inlet, outlet, and then you've got a drain hose right here, so you can actually turn it on so you can drain fuel out. And then you've got a replaceable gauge that you can put on here. Now this one happens to be in liters per minute, and we're going to want to look at gallons per minute. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to check the service information and see how many gallons per minute or liters per minute your vehicle needs to supply in order to be within specifications. We'll look that up in just a minute, but first I'm going to set up the gauge. Right up here on top is a quick connect for the gauge itself, and so I'm going to set that up. Just lift up on the little collar, snap it into place, and with the gauge you've got a pressure relief hose on it as well. And so with that we can hang it. So I zoomed out on it just a little bit so you could see a little better of what I'm doing. The other part of the kit is you've got two fairly good sized hoses, and these have quick fittings on there. And what we're going to do is we're just going to snap one onto the inlet, one onto the outlet. Make sure that they're snapped on there pretty good. So I usually just push them up and then pull down on them to make sure that they're attached. So there we are, they're attached. If you saw the first time I tried to do that, I stuck it on there and I pulled on it and it came right off. The other side, you've got the quick connect fittings on the other side as well. And what we need to do is we need to get some adapters so that we can hook those into the fuel system. We're going to need to identify the fuel system and find out if it's a return system or a returnless system. So if you look right down here on the fuel system itself, here's the supply hose that comes in, and it goes to the fuel rail, and then the fuel rail goes underneath, and it goes underneath this plenum over here. So you can, I don't know whether you can see that on the camera or not, but down underneath this this sensor, there's the rest of the fuel rail, so the other injectors are right down there. There is no return. So this is a returnless system. So you've just got the one supply line, and that's it, going back to coming from the tank. And so what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect that, and then we're going to adapt the tool to fit this hose. Okay, we're going to disconnect the fuel line, and in order to do that we're going to need a quick disconnect tool, which on this particular engine, that's what the tool looks like. It comes out of a kit that we have, and if you notice, the tool kind of comes apart like this, and it's going to slide around the connector and kind of push up, and it expands. There's a spring that looks kind of like an O-ring that's underneath this part of the connector, and this tool comes up and it'll expand that out and allow us to lift it up. Most of these engines, they'll have a connector position assurance tool on here. So that's this metal thing. We're going to have to unclip that. That's basically just a safety clip so that the fuel line doesn't accidentally come undone. So we're going to pop that off and set it out of the way. And then we're going to take the tool and we're going to slide it underneath just like that. And then I'm going to lift up on the tool. At the same time, I'm going to push down on the fuel line. So I'm going to lift up, and I don't know whether you heard that click or not. I'll do that again, so I'll be quiet. So if you heard that click, that means that I'm up underneath the spring and the spring has been disengaged. So I can lift the fuel line up. And now I've got the fuel line lifted up a little ways, I can remove the tool, and then I can go ahead and lift the fuel line all the way out. And the fuel line is now disconnected. And so now I can go to the kit and get the connections I need so that I can hook this back up and hook the tool up in series. So this is the kit that has all of the quick disconnect tools in it. So it has a whole bunch of different styles of connectors. This is the one I was just using on this engine, but they have this style here, which they work the same way. And then they have these metal ones, which are different sizes, and they're different shapes as well to work on different applications. And then we also have hose separators that we can use to help separate them, and all those kind of things. And this is a kit that's made by Leslie, or Lyle, I'm sorry, Lyle. So this kit's made by Lyle, and it's a really good kit to have. They're kind of on the spendy side. I think this kit costs about $100 at the when we bought it anyway. But anyway, if you want to look it up, there's the number. I'll zoom in on it so you can see the number right there. So it's a master plug disconnect set. I'm going to show you how this quick disconnect tool works one more time. These are the adapters that I'm going to need in order to hook the gauge up to the car. And if you look underneath, kind of zoom in on this, there's a spring. You can kind of see that little spring down in there. That spring needs to be stretched out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to slide the tool over the adapter. And this works the same way on the car as it does right here. So I'm going to slide the tool over it just like that. And if you can see how it kind of is ready to go in there. And when I push this down, what it does is it pushes that spring out. So whether you can see that. Once that spring's pushed out, then you can separate the two pieces. And they'll come apart just like that. So the two pieces of fuel line in the car, that's what they look like. So this is the one side that's got the O-rings on it. This is the other side that doesn't have the O-rings on it. So we're going to install those on the vehicle. I've got everything hooked up now, so I'm going to show you the hookup so you know what it looks like. So gauge up here, and then when you come down on this side, I've got my two big hoses that are clipped onto the in and the out. So this is the hose that's coming in from the tank, and this one's coming out and going to the fuel rail. So we'll go over here, and if you look at the fuel lines that I've got here, this metal line right here is the one that's coming in from the tank, and so that's the one I've got my in hose hooked up to. And then this one is the one that's going out to the fuel rail, and I've got it hooked up there. My adapters that I plugged in are right down here underneath. And one thing that I do want to mention that you need to be careful of is when you're hooking up lines, be careful not to bend your fuel lines, because that'll cause a lot of problems when you go to try and hook it back up if the fuel lines get bent. So be careful, and also try not to kink the lines. If you notice on this one, I actually had to go down underneath here, and in order to get it to come up and hook on to the bottom part here without kinking the line. Because if you kink the line, then it's not going to flow gas. And so you got to make sure you look at everything and make sure it's all hooked up right. And then the last part, and this is probably one of the more important ones, is these two lines right here that are on the side of the thing. This little line right here is for relieving pressure in your fuel gauge. So if I had fuel pressure in here, I would push this button right here and it would relieve all that pressure, and the pressure or the fuel will come down this line, down this small line here, and I've got it emptying into a gas tank. And so this line here is a big one. We're going to use this for checking the volume. And if you follow these down, I've got them into a gas can. And so if you forget to do that, when you do your volume test, you're going to be spraying gas all over the floor. Okay, I've got my specifications here for this engine. It's 2000 Ranger, and this is not a flex fuel vehicle, so it's going to be except flex fuel. My fuel PSI should be between 56 and 72 PSI. Key on, engine off should be 56, 72. So it's going to be the same when it's running, when it's key on, engine off. That's what our things should be. It does not give me a fuel volume specification, so we're going to have to go by rule of thumbs on the volume. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check for key on, engine off fuel pressure. So all I'm going to do is turn the key on the vehicle and look to see where the pressure goes up to. And if you notice on this one, the fuel pressure, it only came up to about 20 psi, so that's a problem. So we have some issues going on with the fuel system already that we just identified right there. So I'm going to go ahead and start the vehicle now, and we'll see what our running pressure is. Okay, fuel running pressure jumped up quite a bit. So the running pressure is actually up around 60, 68 psi. So right up here, this is the 70 mark. So we're within specifications while it's running. It's just key on, engine off. We did not have enough fuel pressure. So now let's look at the fuel volume and see what happens with the fuel volume test. So with the fuel volume test, what I'm going to do, I'll back it up here so that you can see the tool a little bit better. There's a knob on the side of the tool right here. Right in the down position, when it's pointed straight down, it's going to be open. So that's just like a regular fuel pressure gauge. When I turn it so that it's level, that shuts the fuel off to the engine. And then when I turn it to when it's pointing straight up, that bypasses the fuel rail, and it goes down into the gas can. And this little ball will come up, and it will show us how much volume or gallons per minute this vehicle is actually running at. So we're going to go ahead and bypass. And you see the ball came up to about 8 psi or 8.8 gallons per minute. You probably don't want to do that very long, because what you're doing is you're pumping gas down into this gas can, and you'll end up draining your gas tank. But that's all there is to a volume test. The other thing that you want... Okay, I'm finished with my testing now, and if I can move that so that you can actually see it, so the glare is not on the gauge. So what I need to do is I need to relieve this pressure. Part of doing a fuel pressure test, and I'll cover this again in other methods of pressure testing, but part of doing a pressure test is once you turn the vehicle off, you should note where your pressure is, and it should not drop off. So right now we're at about 60 psi, and if I sat here and waited for another 10 minutes or so, it would drop all the way down to about 30 psi, which is not good. It's okay to drop off about 4 or 5 psi, but not that much. And the reason I know that is because I was doing some earlier testing. When I shut the vehicle off and waited about 10 minutes, the pressure dropped down to about 30. So we know we have some issues with the fuel system on this particular vehicle. But now I want to disconnect my gauge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this little button right here, and that will relieve all the pressure out of the gauge. And if you notice, it's going down this hose right here, and I've got the hose into a gas can, so I'm not spraying gasoline all over the floor. And and when you disconnect all of this stuff, you're going to have to make sure that you turn the knob. So this knob should be in the closed position when you turn everything off. When you disconnect these hoses, there's going to be some gasoline that leaks out of there. So you might want to have a stack of rags with you so that you can absorb some of this gasoline. You don't want raw fuel dumping all over the engine and stuff, because if that happens, then that's a potential fire hazard, and you don't want that. So, but that's all there is to it. So just to recap, when you hook up your gauge, you're going to hook it up in series with the fuel rail, and this is a returnless system. A return system, you hook it up slightly different. You're going to tap into both the return and the feed. So the in and the out, you're going to hook up. And then once you have this gauge hooked up, you have this in the open position, which is the knob size down. Start the vehicle up, and while you've got the vehicle running, you can check fuel pressure. And once you've checked your fuel pressure up here, so once you've checked your fuel pressure, then you can come out here and you can switch it up to the volume, and you can check the volume. So look and remember, don't leave the volume running too long, because you're going to be pumping a whole bunch of fuel into a gas can. So, and then when you're all finished, turn it to the closed position before you unhook all the hoses, so that you minimize your spillage, is what we want to do. So that's it. We'll see you in the next video. I thought I'd do one more little segment here and just show you how I'm disconnecting these hoses. What I've done is I've got a drain pan sitting right underneath my gauge so that it catches most of the fuel, so I'm not spilling fuel all over the engine. And the way you disconnect these is on these hoses, they have a little clip, and you push in on this clip on the back side here. You push in on it, it separates the connector, and it'll come off. So on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push in on the back side of it, and then I should be able to just disconnect it like so. And I've got my hoses going down into this pan, catching all the fuel, so I'm not draining fuel everywhere. And I drain those as much as I possibly can, and then when I disconnect them from the engine side of it over here, I'll use some rags to kind of help soak up any fuel that I may have in there. So I didn't show it, but once I disconnected the hoses, what I did is I moved this valve to open, which drained all the fuel out of this, and it also drained it out of this tube here. So make sure that you do that before you try and put this back in the box, so you get all the fuel. You want to get all the fuel out of this, and you want to get all the fuel out of your hose.